So it's as part of the requirement, I just need to um, teach based on some of the things that they've taught in the course. So, okay, sorry about that glitch. So we're gonna discuss chapter 7, which is illness, suffering, and healing. So let's start by grounding some basic definitions. So illness is not just a diagnosis, it's a personal and often disruptive experience that alters how patients see themselves and their world. And suffering goes beyond physical pain. It touches the core identity of a person, his autonomy and the relationships. And in contrast, the healing is restoring not just the health, but also the meaning and dignity of the person. These definitions remind us that medicine is about people and not just the disease. This chapter highlights the paradox of the modern medicine, how we can balance the technology and empathy. In the words of Richard Barron, a great gulf now exists between the way we think about disease as physicians and the way we experience it as patients. Before we go any further, I would like to just test our understanding by a fun activity.
Did it open in a separate window?
It did, but it's showing on my laptop. I wonder why it's not showing up here.
He tried to escape from the slides.
Oh, there.
streak.
You're on a streak too. Lost the streak. Can't read fast enough. I can't see. Are you a brain?
You're the brain. Why did they give me a brain?
Cause you're number one.
So good. The last coup I did was with my 7-year-old nephews, and I lost. So.
Oh, redemption.
Thank you guys. So, moving on. So, the chapter discusses a few key themes. The first is that the physician has a dual task of not just diagnosing the disease, but also understanding the individual who's living with the disease. Because the illness and the individual are inseparable. Modern physicians and the modern education are such that they do not train us to understand illness as a human experience. Clinical data, lab reports, the radiology images, they are just data points. It doesn't really show what the impact is on the identity, relationships, and the daily life of the patient. I would like to have a case-based discussion here. I think this scenario is something that's we all are familiar with. So this is a 45-year-old woman who has chronic migraines, and she frequently visits a physician for this. She feels that her concerns about migraines, how they are affecting her job and family life, are dismissed because the doctor is only focusing on prescribing the medication without addressing her broader concerns. So this case challenges us to think about what's missing in our care. Are we addressing the whole person? Are we really listening to what our patients are trying to tell us? And it also underscores the importance of addressing the whole patient on the emotional, social, and practical level, and not just their symptoms. So, again, this is the problem. So, what is the biggest barrier to the patient-centered care in your experience? This you can go to slido.com.
What's the code? Sorry.
So the code is 1286720.
Okay, thank you.
1286720. Looks like time is something that mostly people think that's the biggest barrier. The other ones are the providers, their own bias, fatigue, not enough time to understand the patient. I'm sorry, I don't know why this is not working. So clearly we do not have enough people today, but I just wanted to maybe we have four, maybe we can split into groups of two and discuss these things. That what do you think, in your opinion, the physician could have done differently to make the patient feel heard? What communication techniques would build trust and empathy in this scenario? And how can the physician address the patient's social and emotional and social concerns while still managing the medical issue? We can have like 5 minutes, something.
Very nice.
Maybe like, I mean, I don't know if they did it already, but like asking them how it's affecting like their life.
Yeah.
Cause
Well, it seems like this lady is like, saying this thing aloud.
Yeah.
And then the physician isn't necessarily like asking, like, I guess, like, understanding her more deeply.
Yeah.
So one of the conversations, she's like, I'm having my way.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, yeah, she wants to have you stand, perfect, treat the symptom for me. So that maybe that's, it's just, how the, like,
Yeah.
or how does she, I guess, like, her home constraints or something, it's hard to, like, who needs to, wants that. For all your listening to your channel, and so that, so maybe it's just like, more actually listening, like, how she's hard, if the patient wants to just, not talk.
Yeah.
It's okay,
Yeah.
to just listen.
It's just like, yeah,
And
try
make
to
like,
just
yeah,
understand
for
how
sure,
it
and maybe
sort of
like, if they feel like the time thing is constrained,
I think
maybe
you're
like,
now more and more, and I didn't do this
I don't know if
before,
like,
but
give some more
it's
time, and like,
little chronic conditions.
maybe we can like talk about different appointments or something, like, just like some options.
Offer up an alternative
Yeah.
appointment or follow-up, or something like that, see if like,
Somehow works.
Yeah.
20% improvement.
Yeah, 'cause it seems like
But if the patient's like.
they're just like, like the doctor has like their own like thoughts of what's going on over here, instead of like, yeah, exactly, diving deeper, and like, maybe understanding like her life and how,
Say that this is a very
I don't know, like
challenging
she
condition.
she could be stressed or whatever.
how has it been?
That still is very difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe
What's been affecting
Make
her?
the patient reasonable, and not make some false promises. But like,
And
hopefully
like
you're
your
good.
goals of
You're fine.
Yeah.
That'll work, right?
sort of thing, like, maybe it's not gonna be completely gone, but
How to live with
yeah, like more like,
her pain.
like
Because
the
sometimes migraine.
management strategy, yeah.
Managing
Yeah.
That's so from NCH or the residual
It's
trend.
like active listening.
Yeah.
So
Like, maybe
it's good time, but
Yeah.
the medication is doesn't work for her, so now also.
And I think like sometimes just, yeah, like definitely talk less.
Yeah, listening more, talking less, yeah.
We tend to the heart history, what is the best medication.
Lost them managing.
What is the effect or not.
And it's like stress, exercise, weight loss,
Yeah.
I feel like we kind of address those.
Yeah.
I think if we, yeah.
Like if you listen more, but then you also like give your opinion, I guess, and that is
Or
maybe
just
more medical.
reflecting, yeah, just reflecting back about what she said.
Yeah.
Like, most of the time, it's like, she's concerned about the migraines affecting her, or we can't talk about like, if she has problems at work, or if she's like having problems at home, and things like that. Address those issues, but I think if we help them manage, if we can figure out how her migraines are affecting those areas, or like, then maybe like it'll be like the ability to help more
Yeah.
towards that area of her life. Can't necessarily like help her find a job or.
I think you can give pointers or resources
Yeah, absolutely.
But like, yeah, like in terms of just the position themselves, probably was not so much, but if, yeah, like if they had some like job issues, maybe like, I mean, depending on like also like what capability
Hey, how are you?
like in a team, if they like
Then you prefer the
prefer this role and like not be concerned
Yeah.
with like the stuff.
Almost.
And like it's just
It's almost different. Yeah.
You didn't start yet? You did? Oh, sorry.
I feel like it's just like interesting, it's like, there's like an interconnection, like, is that I feel like I have a lot more time
Yes.
than like, you know, like, younger, so.
Well, yeah, the position is like that's not really through like transportation today, right? Yeah.
And then like, I sometimes like, well, not right now, like mostly like one day, but before, like, you see them about 2 or 3 times a week for like half an hour,
Yeah.
and you're like, I know you so well, like that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, you spent for the week.
First, in the,
Like it sounds like you're offboarding, right? At the same time, it's like directed towards right resources. Yeah, social work, I can also help that stuff as well, right?
that's normally,
No.
medical,
If you're a sole practitioner,
yeah,
maybe
that's very,
a lot more difficult.
easy, not easy.
Yeah,
Not so easy
and I feel like it's just, if like social work,
Yes,
someone needed it, and like, or a solo, like, position, and like, go to
Disha.
social worker.
I can't see you in the video.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, do you want me to change it?
Oh, I feel like it wasn't.
Okay. So you can see you in half the, oh,
True, but like,
That's just my take on it.
that's
But-
true, but I feel like sometimes like the priorities in there,
Yeah.
and like the money isn't there.
Yeah, for sure. No, absolutely, absolutely, I agree.
The patient
And it's
goes
just
to the-
easier if someone like is like, here, this is the appointment, go.
Yeah.
Right,
You know?
right,
Even-
right,
Yeah, even if you can't do it, like, you can't force it, like, the chances that they agree, the chances of agreeing to it.
It's more than like saying, go to the website.
Yeah,
and figure it
yeah,
out.
absolutely.
Or just like go look for it yourself,
Right,
like,
yeah.
no like recommendations or like, these are the ones I would recommend you, so you can like look through it if you want.
So,
Yeah.
sometimes it's,
Whatever.
we didn't know that, even if they help.
You wanna go first?
Okay, we just talked about how, for what could the physician have done differently to make the patient feel heard. Really just kind of like, listening to her a little bit more and, guiding the conversation in terms of like, how does the migraines affect your life and like what areas of your life and, yeah.
Like Jessica was saying, like, what are her goals?
Yeah.
Based on like her migraines, like if we treat her migraines, like what are the goals specifically with like job and family, how has it been affecting her job and family life?
Mm-hmm.
And we were saying like we can't necessarily, like doctors can't necessarily fix those social issues, right? You can't help them find a job, or you can't help them like take care of their kids or whatever, but like we can point them towards resources that could, like Jessica was saying, like if they're in a team, then like if there's a social worker, that could be somebody that they can spend more time with.
Yeah. Definitely. Identifying the stressors and guiding her at the right direction.
I was gonna say, one thing that we also chatted about was outlining sometimes expectation, from like medical interventions, like not providing medications with the expectation that it'll completely solve this condition, and I think just balancing out people. I think that's another example of just acknowledging the suffering and the struggle with this illness and how it affects their life, and accepting that we'll provide these types of interventions, and this will think it is, but the reality is that it may not completely remove this problem, and that way your expectations and interventions are sort of balanced, which is nice.
I can speak to it. So I'm basically the patient, 45-year-old, and I get migraines, and it does affect my life. It's been getting worse. The thing I find, it's not really the doctor's fault, so I see a neurologist, is that when you try different migraine meds, you have to cycle through a certain number for like, you have to give each one 3 months in order to qualify for like the second tier medication. So if, let's say you want to do Botox for migraines, well, you can't do that because you have to go through, triptans, which don't work for me at all. Then you have to go through this other class, and each of them has major side effects for me, and the fact that I had to be put through that for 3 months straight while I suffer with work and family. It's just really a pharmaceutical company regulation, I think. I'm not sure what it is, what that guideline is. It's probably both neuro guideline and pharmacy guideline. But those guidelines do not take into account people's lives whatsoever. Like if something's not working for you within 2 weeks, it's not working for you. Giving it 3 months, definitely a month, I think is more than enough. So it's not the doctor's fault, but I do think the people that make the guidelines don't include suffering at all in those guidelines.
I think you very nicely highlighted the chapter's core theme that, it's not just the disease, it's the other issues that have to be addressed.
Right.
So these are some of the things that I thought of, like, what could the physician have done differently in this case to make the patient feel heard? Maybe listen to them more actively by maintaining eye contact or body language, verbally affirming, like, acknowledging, as you said, acknowledging the concerns, having open-ended questions like, how has this been affecting your life? What worries you most? And summarizing and reflecting, paraphrasing what patient said. So, so they know the physician and the patient are on the same page. Some of the communication techniques that could build trust and empathy could be empathy statements, like, I see how this must be frustrating for you. Non-verbal cues, like, nodding, maintaining open body posture, and do not have, like, not in a hurried demeanor. Having shared decision making, involving the patient in decisions about her decisions and discussing medication options alongside the lifestyle adjustment. Being more sensitive towards cultural or any personal values that may be. And having follow-up appointments to address the concerns, addressing her concerns, signaling ongoing commitment to her well-being. How can the physician address the patient's emotional and social concerns while still managing the medical issue? Maybe having an holistic approach. Instead of just focusing on prescribing medication, the physician can explore the stressors that may be exacerbating the migraines and suggest non-medical interventions, as you said, like stress management techniques, or referring them to a counselor, a psychologist, or a support group who can help address those emotional struggles which are related to her migraines. Having a collaborative care, engaging other healthcare professionals such as a physiotherapist for maybe posture-related migraines, or an NP for a follow-up care to have a comprehensive support. Developing a personalized care plan, having tailored solution could help, and regular check-ins. So patients can be our greatest teachers, and their stories, what we call pathographies, offer a window into their experience of illness. So pathographies are basically patient or family-written illnesses or narratives that reveal the emotional, psychological, and social aspects of healthcare, which are often missed in clinical interactions. Basically, there are different types. So testimonial pathographies are the ones that highlight resilience. They focus on gratitude and survival, and they are often inspiring. Angry pathographies are basically failure in our system. They come from a place of frustration. They are the critiques of the healthcare system and the care that they received, and they could be uncomfortable as a healthcare professional to read. There could be alternate advocacy narratives which explore unconventional paths to heal. They remind us to consider the limitations of our medical approaches and to respect the individual choices. So what can we learn from them? First, we can listen actively, which means going beyond hearing patients' words, means truly engaging with their stories to uncover what are the hidden struggles or insights that they may be hesitating to share. Secondly, to reflect on our own self personally. What could I have done differently to ensure that this patient feels valued and understood? Thirdly, engaging with those pathographies. Reading the patient narratives to broaden our own perspective. Patients are partners in their own care. When we have them in their decision and acknowledge their lived experience, we can foster trust and share the ownership of outcomes. So, I really want to ask everyone here. So, which category of pathographis do you think is most impactful for the physician to read? Testimonial, angry, or alternate advocacy? And if anybody has an opinion, if there is a story that has stuck with you, what did it teach you about care beyond medicine?
So what's the alternative advocacy one again?
So there may be a frustrated person who thinks that allopathy doesn't work. Okay, so he may be advocating that I got relief by an alternative medicine.
Oh, I
so
see, I
and
see.
so they may be alternative. So in that case, we have to understand that we have to respect the patient's perspective and have a broader approach.
Right, okay. I think all of them are important, but maybe like the testimonial, cause it seems like the most open-ended, in terms of like what the patient may be saying. And then like when we're reading it, really just kind of trying to put ourselves like in their shoes, in like whatever however they like talked about the, in the pathography, and just really like being like, if I was in that position, like how would I feel as a patient, and then kind of reflecting on our own like social location and like biases, and then like integrating like both of them and how we like treat the next person, like using it as like a learning tool.
Yeah, definitely. As a reflective tool, to broaden our own perspective.
Oddly enough, as much as I don't enjoy hearing all the angry sort of perspectives, but the fact is, I actually think the angry ones are the most important, I think, to acknowledge, because people, when they share their anger, it's coming from a place of something that's happened, and it does actually illuminate a lot of their perspectives and how they encounter other professionals. And yeah, sometimes I meet a patient who's really mad and they're very frustrated. You can sense it from them, like there's something wrong. And I feel like until you actually sit down and ask them, like, hey, I feel like you're really upset. Can you tell me like what's happening, right? And that way, I feel like they also acknowledge that, hey, this person didn't actually do anything to me. Maybe it's the system.
Yeah.
And then you sort of, I think, at least acknowledge that this is the problem, and we'll try to navigate it together. And I think that actually, at least in my experience, that's helped the most, rather than ignoring it and being very like meticulous about their disease. It doesn't ever actually do much, to be honest, in my opinion.
So they can help identify the system failures. Okay. So moving on, so with patient's perspective, illness disrupts more than health. It disrupts their identity, their relationships, and their independence. So for them, the disease may cause their body to feel alien. The physical symptoms may feel like it's disrupting their own being in the world. It may lead to loss of autonomy, leading to a variety of emotions that they may feel, from grief to fear, anger, isolation, or they may even feel vulnerable. And for some patients, it may lead to significant time and space changes, which may lead to monumental challenges in their life. Like if somebody becomes blind or is wheelchair bound, it can really disrupt their routine a lot. So suffering is definitely, it goes beyond the physical pain. And as Castle says, suffering involves the whole person. And he rejects this concept of dualism of mind and body. It means that mind and body are one. When you suffer, you do not suffer, it's not the body that suffers alone. So you suffer mentally as well. Frank said, people tell stories of suffering to resist disintegration and foster growth. So it's seen that people, who, especially the patients who are suffering a lot, they go into storytelling. And it is believed that this way is a way, it's their way of resisting their own disintegration of their own identity. So they talk about it, they talk about their journey. That's a way of fostering their own growth, and that helps them prevent their own disintegration. And finally, Saunders had introduced this concept of total pain, believing that suffering is it's just not one aspect. It's physical, mental, and spiritual. So what can physician as a healer do? So physician as a healer can assist the body and mind in their natural recovery process by communication and hope, giving hope of survival for a better future to the patient. Understanding their own stories, their unique life experiences, their lived experiences. The importance of presence of physician for the patient cannot be underscored. Genuine care and simple acts of presence can profoundly aid healing. And also, physician can help patients discover the wholeness of their own self. So as a healthcare professional, what is the most challenging among all? What do you find most challenging about balancing these different dimensions of care? So to just give you some prompts, it could be time constraints, it could be emotional fatigue, it could be the communication barriers, it could be that the physician is too much focused on just the clinical outcome, it could be their own personal bias or discomfort, or it could be the complexity of the individual need of the patient.
Time is, for a family doctor, we just don't have the time to do everything that a patient really needs, unfortunately. So we focus on the medical side, the medications, but at the same time, my issue with the chapter, which it was a good chapter, but it's that we're not social workers, or I am a doctor and trained in medicine, and maybe that's the problem though, that if you don't have a team, if you're not working within a health team, you really are limited in what you could do with a patient. And then plus, with billing, you get to bill for the one issue, which is just a medical issue, and it's one issue. Yeah. So the whole scenario just works against addressing all aspects of a patient's needs.
So the system is such that it really prevents the physician to be a healer, actually.
In the way that the patients need, in the holistic way.
So as a patient, a lot of times I feel rushed, that the physician doesn't have the time.
We are rushed.
To, really hear my concerns.
But I guess I don't have a solution for that.
Unfortunately.
I think how we talked about, I think last session, about how, I think it was 1 in 4, 1 in 5 people have more than 2 chronic illnesses, right? And when I see patients, generally are they're older, right? They have multiple conditions and they have more than one issue that needs to be addressed. But when I bring them to a hospital, the nursing staff, or whether it's culture or whether it's for billing purposes, can only put in one complaint at a time, right? They say, what's the chief complaint? This is back pain, but they also have issues with their stomach. They also have issues with their legs, right? So they have so many issues that need to be dealt with, but they only focus on what's the complaint today, right? Treat their concern and then discharge them, right? So I think that's a challenging aspect of it, where I can assess for all these things and I can tell the nurse for triage about all these conditions and issues, but at the end of the day, they'll only be focused on okay, well, let's just deal with the back pain today, everything else we'll just deal with, they can deal with later, or they can go back to whatever.
So that's where the balance comes in. So as healthcare professionals, we also need to understand that there's a fine line between involvement and detachment. Sometimes too much involvement can lead to emotional burnout, while too much detachment, as is the case we see, can leave patients feeling abandoned. So the key is mindful self-awareness, recognizing where our emotions or biases may interfere with our care and recalibrating our own self to stay present for our patients. So attention is the greatest gift we can give to the patient. When we are fully present, even for a brief moment, we validate their experience and create a space for healing. So it's not about having all the answers, giving them all the answers. It's about showing them that we care enough to listen. When we give attention to the patient, they feel valued. It fosters emotional and psychological healing. And the presence, physical and emotional presence, conveys empathy and commitment. Egoistic emotions like fear, frustration, self-interest can subtly undermine the patient-doctor relationship. For example, maybe there is a doctor who tries to avoid a difficult conversation with the patient because it makes them uncomfortable, but at the same time it leaves the patient feeling unsupported. So recognizing own emotions and working through them is essential for ethical and compassionate care. We also need to understand the phenomena of transference and countertransference. So transference is when the patient unconsciously sees the doctor as a parent, a friend, or as an antagonist, leading to misplaced emotions. Countertransference is when doctors may unconsciously respond to a patient based on their own unresolved emotions, like frustration or sympathy. Understanding the dynamics helps us to maintain professional boundaries while fostering trust and healing. We need to understand that self-knowledge is the cornerstone for effective care. Understanding our own triggers and biases can separate personal emotions from professional responsibilities. In that case, mindfulness and reflection would be the tools that will help us. Unfortunately, I need to. So let's go Kahoot one more time. Were you able to join?
I think so.
Were you able to join?
Yeah, it's getting ready. Yep.
I can hear it click.
I know, you're just like, it's like Jeopardy.
your brain again.
The hardest tearing that when I look out at it. So, moving on. So, there are some spiritual aspects of healing. So, healing is not just physical, it's emotional, psychological, and spiritual. And recognizing the spiritual dimension of care means creating healing and connection. For some patients, spirituality could be religious beliefs, but for others, it may simply mean being present with them during their suffering. So, what is the connection between spirituality and morality? So, true spirituality is reflected in our own actions, kindness, empathy, and integrity. Higher morality calls us to go beyond rules and protocols to meet patients where they are. It reminds us that healing is both an art and a moral commitment. So, if anybody could tell me if there is a time that you went beyond the rules to show compassion or kindness, and if you did, how did your actions impact that situation? And today, if you look back, is there anything different that you would do? The goal of this exercise is to connect that personal experience to the concept of spirituality.
I can share. So I don't know if it's like beyond. I don't think it's like beyond the rules necessarily, but definitely maybe a little bit going like to the edge of the scope of the practice, because I saw this patient and it was like for a work sort of injury, and like he felt that his workplace was like kind of forcing him to go back to work, but he got assaulted, like he has some physical like injuries as well, but there was a lot of like more like the mental health side, and like I think he was like getting a divorce and like all this other stuff happening in his life, and then also just like with the work, the insurance, like everything, and he just didn't really want to be there, but he was like forced to go to these sessions, and they would like get him a taxi and like do all this stuff. So sometimes I would just like end up talking to him for like 30 minutes, and he was seeing a counselor, so like I knew there was, you know, more professional help in that aspect. But like I feel like sometimes I had to address that in the session. Like if I saw him twice a week, I'd have to like address it in one of the sessions of that week, so then the next time we could actually do something more like physio related. And like I think for him it just made him feel heard, even though like I wasn't giving him like professional like advice on like what to do in his life, because like his counselor was doing that. But I don't think I would do anything like differently now, because I think I just need to talk to him at that time, or else he was just not going to be receptive to anything I was going to say.
Yeah. So being present sometimes is, you know, more than enough for somebody.
Yeah.
We may not feel that, but it may be of great importance to the other person.
Yeah, I had a really interesting patient when I was in Kingston who had like a little bit of fatigue over the past few months. Actually, what she presented with was she was golfing. She was like, did a big driver swing, and then just felt something crack in her back. Went to the CT, went to the emerge, had a CT, diagnosed with like AML, sclerotic lesions, like multiple fractures in her back, just from like a golf swing. And then AML diagnosis, like prognosis for her, they said like, oh, less than a month. Like anemia, like it was really bad, okay? And then she was to the palliative care unit, and then she was there for 7 months. And then by the time I met her, she was like in the middle of those 7 months somewhere, and then she was not a particularly religious person, but very spiritual, always reading these different books, and then you know, I would honestly sit with her like an hour a day, and just because I actually really just enjoy the conversation, honestly. She's very reflective, very philosophical, and then my sort of beyond the rules was we were talking about books and things we read, and I read a book recently that made sense for what we were talking about and where she was emotionally, and I was like, oh, you know, this is a cool book. So actually when I bought the book, I gave it to her, I said, listen, I can't actually get you a gift, it's not allowed.
but I'll gift it to the library and you can read it first. That's okay. She was like, alright, cool. So I gave it to her, she read it, she gave it to the library. So I went over and above, I guess, in that scenario. But I always bring it back to the system. The reality is, if the system gave you time, gave you money, that's really where the credit goes. That's what I mean, right? So I actually kind of always reflect on these questions of overvalue people's own compassion and saying, like, my compassion is great, but should not compensate for the system. And because that's what leads to burnout, right? It's not that we need everybody to be the best version of themselves. That's great in an idealistic world, but life is hard for practitioners. They are, right? So our kindness should not be weaponized as like, this is the cure to the system, right? That's sometimes how I feel in this conversation. And yeah, I love when people appreciate you and say, yeah, you did a great job, thank you. But I always think like, okay, bring it back to the system, like how do we make this better so more people can do it? And it's not just, take every ounce of empathy they have to fix these problems. I don't think that's sustainable.
Right, because you burn out. That's a really good point.
So sometimes serious illnesses prompts patients to reflect deeply on their own unresolved guilts, regrets, or any unmet spiritual needs. And this reflection can open pathways for emotional and spiritual growth alongside the physical healing. There's a very good example in the chapter of this Paul Tornier's case. He was a physician. He was going through a lot, but he found that his recovery was stagnant until he addressed some of the issues. Like, he had some personal issues, and till the time he addressed those, his healing was stagnant. This concept of moral loneliness, which we'll discuss on the next slide. So suffering can be a profound teacher. For patients, it can lead to growth and resilience. For physicians, it's an opportunity to grow, to learn about shared humanity and ethical care. By addressing suffering, we can foster mutual growth, create deeper connections with our own patients. So suffering is often tied to the feeling of being lonely or being isolated. Patients often feel alone in their pain. They can feel disconnected from others and their own selves. So physicians can address this by fostering connections, by having them to share the decision-making process, by valuing their input and their preferences, and having collaborative care by building a partnership with the patient and other caregivers to create a supportive and inclusive healing environment. So, what are the signs of spiritual or moral suffering in the patients that you may have observed? I'm going to throw away some of the prompts just to make it more interactive. Some of the prompts that are could be like their behavior. Let's say a patient's body language or tone may reflect their inner distress or any unresolved issue that they may have. Like, did they just start avoiding eye contact? Are they fidgeting? Are they showing some kind of withdrawal? Is there any change in the communication? Like, do they have any vague or indirect responses or expressions? Do you feel that they are showing some emotional prompts? Like, are they angry? Are they sad? Do you feel that they are hopeless or they are frustrated? And if you offer a hand of empathy, how do they react? There could be physical prompts. They may be having somatic symptoms like unexplained fatigue, pain, energy that doesn't align with the medical diagnosis. There could be verbal prompts, like are they using words like regret, guilt, I feel isolated? Are they going through some relational prompts, like are they going through some strained relationships? Do you find any existential prompts, like are they saying, why is this happening to me? What is the meaning of suffering? Do they display any spiritual longing or conflict? Do they feel disconnected from their faith? So I just want to go to the whiteboard and just each one of you, if you could tell me what you feel what are the prompts that you thought are important or you felt helped you?
I think for me, like the behavioral prompt is like really important.
Sorry?
Like the behavioral prompt, like the body language sort of thing. Because I guess for me, like if I'm teaching some sort of like exercise or whatever, and then like they're trying it out, you can kind of see like from their face, like if they are having pain or if there's like some other type of thing going on that you need to address.
So non-verbal.
Yeah, like
Non-verbal prompts, right?
I think physical prompts is definitely more, I think a little bit more of the rare ones, but I'll give you an example. I saw a young patient who had, I kid you not, 22 CT scans of her abdomen within 1 year. And she presented with 10 out of 10 pain at each one of those CT scans. Now medical imaging is not perfect, but if you've got 22 CT scans in a year, more than likely something might be going on. So I feel like sometimes when you have those anomalous cases, you're like, okay, there's something here that needs to be addressed, right? That maybe is not physically medical, right?
Yeah, definitely. Eugene, as a in the field, what kind of prompts like, because your expertise is different. So in
Like-
your experience,
yeah.
what do you think is the
Along
most
with like what
important?
Jessica was saying, like the behavioral prompts are really important, like are fairly important to me. Like it depends on the patient, really. But like I think I had a patient who I guess now is like more of a frequent caller, but like she would complain of something specific and then she would tell you all these like everything about it, like what the pain feels like and what she's doing, like all that kinds of things, and then she would just shut down. She would stop talking to you. Like she was sitting in the truck, she would stop talking to you. Like I would ask like, okay, if there's something else going on. So they'll be asking her like, oh, like, is there something that's bugging you? Is something bothering you? Is something happening at home? Nothing, completely shut off. And then it was only after I brought her to the hospital, like another colleague said like, oh, I've brought her to the hospital before and she has like a history of like bipolar disorder and things like that. And like, it just, she just calls for like random symptoms and then she just wants to either like leave the house or do something else. So like that's, I think like I see a lot of that, like especially like behaviorally, I think.
Okay.
The relational prompts can be a good tell.
Okay.
Like, sounds so basic, but it's not. When I talk to patients about menopause, you're trying to figure out how bad is it, and then you find out, you know, their job is blowing up, their marriage is blowing up, and they didn't really tie that to their symptoms.
Yeah.
But the fact that everything's blowing up now may be a prompt that something's going on. I mean, I guess that's more a sign of, I guess it's not quite spiritual or moral suffering, but it is. It's for medical, hormonal
Yeah.
reasons behind it, but I mean, I'm not sure if I answered that right.
Alan?
Yeah, the one thing that I always think is sign of that is the patient who do not want to, let's say, listen or that kind of issue. They always different the contents, and as I usually said, it shut down the conversation or something like that. I'm always thinking that most important things about that is we ask the permission to obviously to talk or discuss about that. If we don't do that, the patient or the never discover that show us the suffering or the other things to us. Because I sometimes feel like that, and we understand that is important, but for the patient, for the other thing, don't want to ignore the receipt at that time or point. So it's very important to ask permission. I think it is very important for that.
Thank you all for the input. Looks like behavioral is something that is most important. So we can have just another activity. If you could maybe group like 3 and 2 and think of a time when suffering, yours or someone else, taught you a lesson. You can discuss what are the lessons that you emerged from that suffering. How did that connection or the absence of it impact the experience? Are there any insights that you think can guide your approach to patient care? And then we can discuss the key takeaways.
You guys say that.
Okay.
I'll come up with I'll sit. Sorry, I don't wanna move her camera thing. That's
Oh,
fine.
right. She's filming herself.
Sorry. There's so many bags. What? Okay, I actually can't think of a specific example.
There's just someone else has taught a lesson. I think definitely life experience teaches you more, like how to relate to patients more.
So like, you mean like just like over like
Over
practicing
your
stuff?
life, yeah,
Oh, yeah.
practicing like with me, because my father passed away when I was 25, and I find that like made me emotionally like much more mature. Like the growth was when I look back on it, it like grew me up basically. And so when patients face loss, I think I'm good at dealing with that because I know what that feels like.
Right. So it's kind of like the transfer.
It is
like,
in a way, it may be
type
helpful
of-
transference.
Yeah.
but-
Yeah.
it's
Because like it's like more relatable.
Yeah.
You
It's
can
sad,
actually,
but-
like, understand.
Yeah.
Because I feel like a lot of times, like people talk about something like that, or if they have some sort of like one of my one of those like things in school. Like I was at Jesus Margaret, and there was like some stuff on the palliative units and on other units, and like for me it was like kind of like it was sad, but it was also like unrelatable.
Yeah.
But like you kind of have to like acknowledge, you know, whatever the person is saying.
Yeah.
But like I'm trying to like avoid saying I understand, because
Right,
then
'cause
it like I don't really
Yeah.
understand. But like, how can I
tricky.
help you?
Because I think it
but
helps to
not-
understand, but then there's that whole transference thing too, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to over-identify with the patient's situation.
Because then you'll
too.
get like emotionally
Yeah.
burdened. And
I think helps is if you're ever a patient for anything, it makes you
As a clinician, you're
a
there
better
for
clinician.
I think so, yeah.
Because you're just much more sympathetic to what the system's like and how they're feeling, and you get it.
Yeah, I definitely feel like as a patient, like I feel like I'm just like someone who's like, maybe I'm like a person that's like worried on like what's gonna happen. Like they're gonna be like, oh, you have these issues or like whatever. So then I'm like an avoider.
Yeah.
So, which is like bad, I guess. But then,
But it probably makes you understand when other people are that way too.
yeah, like I remember like one, I had this like one patient, and we were like the same age, or like around the same age at the time, and she was like, she's a nurse like by background, and she's like, I've never been to physio, and like
From that,
I guess she did verbalize that she was like scared of how it would go. And like there was nothing like really wrong with her. It was more like rehabilitative anyways, but she, I guess like not being familiar in that situation, but then being a nurse herself, maybe she like feels like that the patient is in a vulnerable space, so she felt like she maybe would experience that. So she actually like said that like really early in the session, and I think for me it was like good to know that she had those thoughts, and like hopefully she didn't feel that way. And I don't think she did because got along like really well, and she didn't outwardly say anything that seemed like that. But I think it was interesting because I feel like her as well as a patient.
Yeah.
I just don't say it.
Right, like you feel vulnerable. Plus, you know, it's a weird situation when you know so much about the healthcare system.
Yeah.
You can feel extra vulnerable when you're in a position as a patient.
I thought you would have felt the other way.
No, I think you feel extra vulnerable. Can't explain it. I think because you know what can go wrong and mistakes can be made and how slow the system is. And patients, sometimes it's like blissful.
They're just like,
ignorance.
this is
Yeah.
like what I need to do.
Right.
This, like, what else am I supposed
When
to
you know,
do?
like, oh, this might not actually
Right.
work, or yeah.
I guess because you're like, yeah, you're like, I'm going here, but but what if it doesn't work?
Right.
Then what? Then what do I
Right.
do?
And you're gonna think that more as a clinician than the lay people think.
Right, because they're like, they
We'll
think
do
that
this
this
and
is
it will
gonna
work.
This is the last line.
What?
In the interest of time, I think we can just quickly have your thoughts.
What did we talk about? I don't even know what we talked. We just generally talk.
Well, it was interesting. I was talking about how when you've gone through health issues yourself, you've been a patient or just life experience, that it does help you understand patient suffering more, like you get it more. But then Jessica brought up a good point that sometimes it can lead to transference. You might over-identify. It's really hard because you can't, like, we're people. We're people, so you can't escape the fact that you can relate to others. But I do think for me, having been a patient in certain aspects, that it has made me a better doctor in that way. Or perhaps I overshare, I don't know.
I overshare.
Maybe I'm ridiculous, but I like, so for me, I lost a parent fairly young, like I was 25, and I find when people come in with loss, I'm not nearly as awkward as other doctors can be. I can handle that well. Sometimes I do overshare, but it makes the patient feel better. Like a 19-year-old sitting in front of you saying, I can't handle this, and I can tell them, like, I've been through that and you can handle this. I think that helps a lot. I'm not sure I should be doing that, but I think it helps the patient a lot, more than any pill ever would. I'm not sure I should be doing that more, but I do it.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, like if I specialize in palliative care, so he does it all the time.
Yeah.
He had an interesting story about it, but I think my story about it was that when I go to palliative patients, it's more so that it's not so much focusing on the patient, but focusing on the family and like how they're processing suffering. Or even like if I go to calls where like it's like a patient who's obviously dead and they passed away, and I think like there was one time I've done it so many times that I think like sometimes it helps if you give your take on it. And one time I remember telling somebody like, oh, like for what it's worth, like your mom seemed like was in bed, they were laying in bed, they seemed comfortable, the TV was on, right? They seemed like they passed away comfortably in bed. Like they didn't seem like they had no grimace in their face, they seemed like they passed away comfortably. And the patient says like, or the family member, the daughter, I forget who it was, said like that actually really did help. I'm glad that my mom passed away comfortably and she wasn't in pain when she died in the comfort of her own home.
So with this, I will just conclude with the final thought by Sir Edward Livingston Trudeau. He said, to cure sometimes, to relieve often, and to comfort always. As we move forward in our roles as healthcare professionals, let's strive to combine the science of medicine with the art of empathy, remembering that our greatest power lies not just in curing, but in comforting. So Eugene, you just did that. You comforted that patient. There was no cure. So to cure sometimes, but to comfort always. Thank you.
Can I add one last thought? It's just like been sitting in my brain. But like one thing I always find interesting in this conversation is also like our medical legal bodies, because I find that at least the way, for example, the CPSO regulates things, there isn't actually much value for a physician to incorporate like philosophy, spiritual care. Like actually the medical legal system inherently is medical legal, right? So I think that's the one thing that we sometimes don't factor in, is that when we're documenting for medical legal purposes, and then our empathy is like what we provide and what we want to add, and we know that